Hello, everybody. Mark Schaftlein with you, and this is the Schaftlein Report. It's Wednesday's edition, and we're broadcasting from Southern California, two locations in Southern California, actually, Newport Beach. And I'd like to welcome my guest host today, Brian Godawa. Brian, you are based, I believe, in Los Angeles, correct?
Incorrect.
Okay, where am I speaking to you today?
I was there for 20 years, but I just moved to Texas a year and a half ago.
You're a smart man.
I escaped.
You escaped. You got out of California.
Oh,
okay.
yeah.
What part of Texas are you broadcasting from today?
Dallas area, Dallas suburbs.
Dallas area. Okay. Well, look, we love the state of Texas. We have a lot of clients in Texas. We've done a lot of great things. You're a Californian that has escaped. So we welcome you from the great state of Texas. So happy to have you with me today.
Glad to be here.
Hey, so listen, Brian, for the benefit of our audience, why don't you give a little background? Because, we're going to talk a lot about the Hunter Biden situation, but you have authored many books. You've been a screenwriter, a filmmaker. You've done a series of films. Give our audience a little background about things you've been involved with, and then we'll get into the meat and potatoes of today's topic.
Sure. My first movie that got made, that is still to this day, it's one of my favorites. I feel like it was just everything that I love to do, which was To End All Wars. That was in around 2001. That starred Kiefer Sutherland, Mark Strong, and some guys who before they were big, which is kind of cool. And that was a true story, but that started my screenwriting career. And I had since been, writing for movies for years. And but I had a couple of bad years, as everyone often does, and it forces you to go, okay, how else can I make money? How can I sort of expand my horizons? And, in terms of as a writer, I thought, well, why don't I start writing novels, because that's something and self-publishing them. I can do them myself and, rely on myself. And I did that. And my first novel was Noah Primeval, which was sort of a supernatural retelling of the Noah story. Meaning, I have the angels and watchers and demons and stuff in there. It's kind of a supernatural approach, which is certainly biblical, but nevertheless, that became it exploded right at the time when Kindle was becoming big. And so I realized, this is a good way to make a living and tell my stories and get my stories out. So I started writing novels, and I've been going down that track mostly of these supernatural retelling of Bible stories, and they're called Chronicles of the Nephilim. Anyway, that's been a sort of like a parallel track with my screenwriting. And then, recently, because Hollywood has become so woke, that they were just becoming they're to the point where they're changing all scripts to be woke, and they're hunting people like me down as the great Satan, because I'm like a white male Christian conservative, screenwriter.
You and I are the Antichrist to the woke crowd.
Yeah, literally. So but that I've always been an independent filmmaker, so I just didn't need to be around Hollywood anymore. So I moved out to Texas and stuff. So, but in the meantime, though, in the last few years, I had met these filmmakers who are journalists, and they did documentaries. So that's Phelim McAleer and Ann McElhaney, and they did some documentaries. One of them was called Frack Nation, which I highly recommend. I think it's still on Netflix or Amazon. But so they did conservative type approaches, documentaries and such. And then they wanted to move into more dramatic narratives and movies, and so they did the movie Gosnell, which is really good. I recommend that. That's about the true story about an abortionist who was a serial killer in Pennsylvania, because he killed more not unborn babies. He birthed babies and killed them. Right. So they did that, and then they came to me with another project where I helped him write a. Sort of a play called Obamagate. That's free on YouTube. And that was the story of the two FBI agents who were trying to take down trying to take down Trump during that election. And then they came to me, shortly after the 2020 election. They said, we want to do a movie on Hunter Biden's laptop. And at that time, it was still massively suppressed in the in the mainstream media. But we had, because I read alternative media sources, I knew about it. And And I thought it was a great idea. But they didn't know what to do. It's like, but how do we do this? Because this is a weird one. You know, how do you make a movie about Hunter Biden's laptop, right? So I thought about it, and I thought, and they said not a documentary, right? So it's like, how do you do that? Because just what little I knew at the time, even before I researched it, he's got all these dirty dealings with Ukraine and with China, and it's very complex. In fact, I had a hard time following all the details. And I think that's one of the reasons why they're able to hide so much is in the complexity, right? But nevertheless, it was important material, and it ultimately, showed a corruption so deep in the current presidential administration that it was a story that had to be told. But how can you do that entertainingly? And I realized, first of all, Hunter is a very how shall we say, he's a Hollywood character. Okay.
Yes.
Sure. Because he's a sex addict, he's a drug addict, cocaine addict, right? And he does it out in the open, and he gets away with it, and he knows all these big wigs, and he loves going to strip joints, and he falls in love with strippers and gets them pregnant. So I'm thinking, I hate to say it, but this is a Hollywood movie, right? And
well, in the traditional sense, you would think so, but I bet you didn't go to a whole lot of cooperation when you were back on the left coast.
Oh no, no one would want to be a part of that, right?
Right.
But so I thought, how can you also, another dilemma is, so we realized, and by the way, they also told me right up front, they said, you know what, we don't want to demonize Hunter. We want this to be a good story, and he's a tragic character. And I agree. And I said, a tragic character is someone who's very human. And look, it's easy. The left demonizes the right as being Hitler, and it's absurd, but that's what they do. And I don't want to do the same thing back to them and
right.
just make them out to be these cardboard villains.
You didn't want to be what the left has become.
Exactly. And the truth is, great storytelling, great movies, all do have complex moral characters. So even the hero of a movie has to have character flaws. And sometimes if you're doing a tragedy, which is a movie that more ends in a downside, Othello or, something like that. Or, the movie where the criminal guy like Scarface, gets killed in the end or whatever. You have to show that there is some humanity in that person despite their evil. And that is the point of connection that we all have. If we just say, oh, he's like a Satan, then we don't learn our lessons from the same human nature that is in Hunter Biden is in all of us. It's just at different levels. And we choose to feed the good dog or the bad dog. And that's how we end up becoming who we are, right? And so if we're honest about that, I thought, you know what? Here's a guy who had also a very interesting relationship with his dad and his dead brother. Before his brother died, they had a trio of a relationship. Their mother and sister had died in a car accident when they were young. And so these three, and they came out almost like a mafiosa cliche, where like the father is the patriarch, and Bo was the perfect son who could do no wrong, and he was probably going to run for president, right? And then you have Hunter, who's the F up. He's the guy that he wants to be loved, but and he can't get that love because of his own nature, right? So these were the things that we wanted to explore, and the family dynamics of that family dysfunction. So on the personal human level, that's what we wanted to explore and be honest about it. But then the second difficulty was, okay, we've got that human drama that's going to make it interesting. And then of course, I thought, okay, what about the laptop? How do we make that interesting and dramatic?
Good question. Yeah, I'm sitting here saying, okay, how'd you get through that? Yeah.
And well, so the whole thing was, now this movie is rated R for language and drugs and sex, but there's no nudity in it. But nonetheless, we had to accurately show that world of his in order to make it ring truthful. So we have it on December 2019, which is when the laptop first was found out that it was given to the FBI, and the FBI rejected it, right? So I thought that's where we'll start, because that's the inciting incident that starts the story, so to speak. And I thought, well, what would Hunter do when he found out that happened, not knowing what was going to happen in the future? He thought, he'd be depressed. And what does he do? He go to a strip club and coke out, right?
Does his traditional
yeah.
activity.
So I actually chose to tell the story through the eyes of a 23-year-old dancer, exotic dancer, stripper, right? And she is a liberal who's a Democrat, but she doesn't really know much, right? And he falls in love with her in one night, right? And then what happens is she discovers who he is and discovers his problem. He confesses it to her. She becomes kind of a confessor for him. And then he then explains to her what's on the laptop. And then that enables us to bounce around in time and space in order to hit all the facts without, if you were to tell the full story, it would be, it would be a miniseries, not a miniseries. It would be a full series,
It
right?
could be a full season's worth of
full season.
show.
Absolutely. Oh, and I would have been awesome to do that, but of course we couldn't afford it. So, and then of course, Joe Biden shows up in the dark SUV and to ask Hunter, I heard they got this laptop. What's going on? Tell me what's on that laptop, or this could hurt my whole election, right? He
Joe Bidenism.
Yeah, he fumbles the words, right? So anyway, that was the way in which we could then, as he explains the story, we bounce around and we're able to show the facts. And the thing that, but there's also something else, because facts can still be boring. I'm sorry, but you want to entertain a movie. So I thought one of the movies that really was a great example to me of telling a complex, otherwise boring details in an entertaining story was the Big Short. I don't know if you've seen that.
Yeah, sure. Michael Lewis.
Yeah. And that was the one that told the story of the housing crisis and stuff.
Right.
And I love that the snarky humor, that the actors would sometimes talk to the camera. And that was a way that you could jump around a lot and still make things connect and tell an interesting story, but also have a little bit of humor along the way. And that was sort of the genesis of the whole thing. And, they trusted me with that. And then later on, we got the Hollywood director, Robert Davey. I call him Robert Davey instead of his real name, Robert Davi, because he's been saying my name incorrectly on all of his interviews.
It's a little touche there.
Yeah, so Robert Davey gets a hold of the script, and he's had a long Hollywood career as an actor, a character actor. He was a James Bond villain, right? But he also had he's had a lot of experience in all the areas, and he even directed a movie before. So they hired him to direct it, and he tried to bring that Hollywood sensibility. And they shot it in Serbia, so because it's low budget, crowdfunded, because there's no way people would have the guts.
Especially all the liberal financiers in Hollywood, but they're not going to touch it.
But look, even the conservative financiers, you try to go to them for money. And believe it or not, I hate to say it because I'm a conservative, but they just don't believe enough in culture to really support things. And there's also that fear. So they went out and did the crowd.
Who's the they? Who's the they?
The producers. So
okay.
Ann and Phelim are the producers, and
right.
they're the ones who are in charge of the whole thing. They get the money. They make sure it gets made. And they would win the Oscar if it did.
So let me ask you this question. They use crowdfunding. Now, conservatives have a problem with that. I mean, in other words, they selected Serbia, low budget, right? Okay. Yep. They raised it. What was the capital, if I may ask, ballpark range on a film like this? How would it be, Brian?
Yeah, it was a $2.5 million budget. And they are a nonprofit called the Unreported Story Society. So, so they basically raised the money and they offered little things that you offer, but there's no investment. It was all just raising money for donations for the movie. They're amazing. They did that with Gosnell too. And it's a lot of work. And, but boy, I don't think I could ever do it.
Put it in perspective, Brian, put it in perspective for our audience. $2.5 million may sound like a lot of money to people, but on doing a film of this scope and such, it's really small potatoes, isn't it?
Yeah, it is. Especially 2.5 in America would be a lot less, but in Serbia it's maybe almost twice get twice the price, because you've got when it's not just the writer, producer, and director, and it's not just the actors. There's also a lot of background actors. Now, their wages are not that high, but still there's a lot of background actors.
Travel expense,
set designers, there's lighters, all gaffers,
sound.
all kinds. Yeah. So there's so much put in. Oh, and then you have to rent locations, so
Sure.
that adds up like that,
Yeah. Yeah.
totally.
Yeah.
So,
I'm just wanting to put it in perspective for our viewing and listening audience because, this turned into a lot bigger deal. I mean,
yeah, and it looks way more expensive than it was. So that's good. You want a movie to look like, you want a
Right.
movie to have a sense of bigness to it, so that people don't think,
Yeah.
oh, this is cheap,
Right.
And it
Right.
definitely has that look to it, that Hollywood look.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, and that drove the woke people crazy. I'm sure the fact that here a conservative producer, conservative author, could create a location, come up with the money, budget it, and now all of a sudden, boom, this happens. And you've mentioned about his fallacies. Put it in perspective here. Here's the son, sort of the dark son, if you will. The good son by now had passed away.
Yeah. And
now the relationship, instead of being a trifecta, Bo Biden, Hunter Biden, and Joe, is now really reduced to Joe and Hunter.
Exactly.
So, carry on, Greg. Brian, as you go from there.
Yeah. So, wow. I mean, yeah, where do you begin? Fortunately, a lot of it has come out since we started, and there's nothing. Just so your viewers know, there's nothing new in the movie that hasn't been out. But like I said, what the movie does, it helps simplify and focus on the most important high points and shows how they're all connected. Mm-hmm. So we start the journey with Hunter explaining to Joe what's on the laptop in terms of emails and such, and how they're connected to the Ukraine. So we jump over to the Ukraine and we see a little bit of the story of the Zlochevsky and some of these corrupt oligarchs that Hunter had to deal with, and we show how Hunter had made these deals and he had no legal expertise, no oil expertise, no expertise in anything, right? His expertise was his father. He was the son of Joe Biden.
He was the bag man for the big guy.
Exactly. And so then, we show those connections and how how their deals are meant to siphon money then to the Bidens. And then ultimately, I think that the movie rises in its stakes because by the second half of the movie, we deal more with the Chinese connections, and if you think about it, that is a far more evil.
Yeah,
it's a far greater evil.
Let me sort of question on that, because here we have a situation in the Ukraine piece first, where Donald Trump gets impeached over a phone call, calling it what it is, and yet the former vice president is on tape basically looking at his watch saying, okay, guys, if I don't get this within an hour, no U.S. aid is coming. I mean, it's just the hypocrisy, which we talk about on this show all the time, between the left and what's good for the left, which is bad for the country, the center, which is good for the country. It's hypocrisy at its worst. Now, fast forward it after that debacle in Ukraine. Then again, folks, this is pre-war, so this doesn't have anything to do with the war. Now, as you said, China, the big enchilada.
Right, because the Chinese Communist Party is the biggest global danger in this world. And so to discover that not only did they make deals with Chinese companies, all of whom are connected to all businesses that make money in China are connected to the Communist Party.
One way or another.
Multiple of these companies, they had connections to military, to the military in China. They had connections to nuclear. They had connections to weapons that are used, that would be used against the United States if we had a war, right? And so and then lastly, even, this facial technology, a deal that Hunter made with this company, Face++, that makes facial recognition technology, which is used to imprison their own people. And they've been using it against the Uyghurs. They've been using it against the Christians too, but the world knows more about the Uyghurs, right? The Uyghur Muslims and stuff. So
share a little bit about that technology, if you could, Brian, because a lot of Americans may not be familiar with it.
Yeah, well, what little I know about it is just that, China has just hundreds of millions of cameras all over China.
Everywhere.
And so interestingly, I mean, look, I don't go deep into it. I know that there's some people who go really into this, but it's the technology that's going on right now that Facebook even has, that Google has, their ability to recognize faces all across the internet, almost, instantly, it's really scary because they can find you just about anywhere, right?
Yeah.
Well, China has developed that aggressively, even to the point where they're trying to use it here in America. But nonetheless, they've developed it so it's in all the cameras and they can know where everybody is at any time. And they use it to find the people that they're after. Like when they, for instance, the Muslims. So they're using it to, they find out who the Muslims are, then they find them, and then they put them into the concentration camps where they're re-educating the extremism out of them, right?
Yeah.
And they're raping the women and they're aborting their babies and they're just doing all the, and there's even organ harvesting. Organ harvesting their prisoners who are political prisoners. These aren't criminal prisoners, right? And so, yeah, that to me, in terms of, people can argue about the political connections, but when it gets that personal, to me, that's and Hunter Biden was involved with that company, and so that's the kind of
crossed over the edge, if you will, where he's dealing with the Chinese Communist Party, which, again, folks, not a lot of good comes out of the Chinese Communist Party.
And it's not just that they're making money off of the Chinese,
right.
It's that they're involved in companies that are actually against the United States. So that's, some have said that borders on treason. I don't know, but I tell you what, it certainly requires an investigation by our intelligence agencies, who we now know have been covering the FBI, the DOJ. They've been all covering for all these years, not just the last few years, but for years for Hunter Biden. They've been covering him and making sure that nothing happens to him and none of these crimes are exposed.
Let me ask you this, Brian. Do you sense any sort of cracks in the safe, where people are saying, okay, look, Biden's president, he won the election. There's investigations going on from John Durham. There's other investigations happening. Is there any sense that maybe a legitimacy, let's see the word I'm looking for, a true outcome about what really happened can come to the surface and basically not be covered up by the mainstream media, which in my view is the propaganda arm of the Democratic Party?
Well, yeah, I have a pessimistic side of me.
As do I. Been there, done it, got the T-shirt before.
Yeah, but I also have an optimistic side, and I do believe that some truth, not all truths, but some truths, if you just get enough voices hammering home, eventually, and especially historically speaking, the truth will come out. Not all the time, but for some things, and I do think the laptop is a perfect case of that, right? I mean, I lived through it when they were like, none of us knew. We just heard the news that they found a laptop and it supposedly had Hunter's emails on it. But who of us could have known until someone verified it, right? Well, New York Post verified it and such, but then you have the intelligence agencies saying, oh no, this is Russian disinformation. This is Russian disinformation. So can you imagine the normal citizen going, well, if the intelligence agency said that, right? But now the truth has come out that they were lying, and the news media were lying, and this is Hunter Biden's laptop. So that's a good example of the case that sometimes the truth does come out, but whether or not it will result in prison sentences, I doubt it, because all the people in power, they have enough. They have captured all the major institutions, certainly in government. So including the DOJ, the FBI, they're all in on it together. So of course they're not, nothing we say and bring up is going to matter, because just like, these Soros DAs around the country, they just don't arrest the criminals. They just don't do it and they know they don't have to. And they know that normal people like us aren't going to rise up and force them to do their job, because we hardly even know what they're supposed to be doing. Right. So it's like the people in power know how to manipulate power enough that they can just stand there in broad daylight and do what's so obviously immoral and illegal, and they're going to get away with it. However, this is where we hope that, maybe the midterm elections might bring some accountability. So the whole goal is accountability, getting the Republicans in there to start doing some real investigations and hopefully have some accountability. So we'll see.
That's a big if, because we've had 2 years now where since the 2020 election, all this stuff is basically simmered below the surface.
Yeah.
Okay. And, people, conservatives can say, well, there's this, we know this happened. We know this happened with Hunter. We got the laptop. We know he was the bag man. He got the Chinese, the big guy's money. But again, if there's no group that's going to lead the effort, as an example, here today, we have his father, the president, delivering a major speech about the Russians at the United Nations. You would think the liberal media would coordinate a little bit better with the New York Attorney General's office so that on the same day that Joe Biden, the big guy, is delivering a major foreign policy speech, we wouldn't be inundated with breaking news. Donald Trump and the Trump family, Letitia, whatever her name is, the Attorney General in New York. I mean, it's almost like the media stepped on their own story. Here they should be rightfully so covering Joe Biden's speech, which, I'm not going to editorialize good, bad, or different, but it was a major speech at the United Nations representing our country, the United States, and its position. And what happens, that story gets drowned out by, the New York Attorney General. And again, I expect that to happen. It never happens where, quote, a Hunter Biden story overlaps something else. It just doesn't happen. And our side sort of has gotten used to it. So I tend to agree with you on that, Brian. I think the investigation piece really needs to continue.
But I think it goes one step further, and that is, look, there are a couple of great guys in Congress, Jim Jordan, some of these guys who really do step up. Devin Nunes did when he was in there. And there's a few others, but not enough. And the problem is we need Republicans who are willing to be aggressive, but they're so worried about fighting fair and about whatever being I don't know, noblesse oblige. I don't know. It's just this mentality that left has no idea. They know if we want it, we'd go for it. They'll even go for it criminally, like the whole January 6th thing. It's just absurd. Right. It's obviously not an insurrection and everybody knows it, but they still keep pushing it. Well, we need Republicans who are willing to push for real accountability when they do find out these crimes and put these guys in prison. But I fear that too many Republicans don't have the guts to. They're cowards. They don't want to push for that.
Let me ask you this. Now that the film has been proved, what has been the reaction towards you among your former fellow Californians, and how has your life changed as a result of the film?
Well, so far it really hasn't. The writer is, interestingly, even though the writer is the originator of, like Steven Spielberg said, if it ain't on the page, it ain't on the stage, So the writer is the originator of that product, that genius of that writing. Right. But it involves many people along the way. The producers, the director puts a lot into it. The actors, so it is a team project. But in terms of the publicity, what ends up happening is usually it's the actors that get the publicity and maybe the director and the producers. The writer is rarely ever given publicity. So I mentioned, and I'm not complaining, I'm just saying this is how the system works.
That's how it goes.
But even myself, I don't even ask who writes a movie as much as I ought to. And I'm a writer, right?
You're a writer.
So it's like, who directed it,
Right.
So no, I'm not getting too much. I'm not really getting hit too much. But the producers and the director they're more out there. And, but I will say this though, in general though, the reaction has been like rabid, froth-mouthed dogs. The left is attacking this like nothing else.
Yes.
And the reason why is because it's good. And they know it, and it hits home, because if it wasn't, they would just ignore it.
Right, they would, exactly.
Yeah, and they could afford to ignore it because no one would be watching it, but a lot of people are. We have people dedicating like podcasts of like hours where they're watching the entire movie and then critiquing it as they go along. There are articles in all the major left-wing, newspapers, Vox, Guardian, all this stuff, and they're all these vomiting of expletives and hate speech and just vituperative comments upon vituperative comments. It's just, it's actually hilarious. It actually shows you like, ooh, they really think this is effective. So they got to mock it and tear it down to the very ground. It's great.
Yeah. Well, and we got a little thing called the midterm elections coming up.
Yeah.
And oh, by the way, outside of an NBC News poll that showed the president at 45%, down 7 points, the Real Clear Politics average has him closer to 41%, upside down by 13, 14 points. So
Wow.
you think that may have an effect coming up here? And the big question is going to be, and we talk about on our show all the time, will the president's negative poll ratings have an effect when it comes to specifically independent voters? We know right now 80% of Democrats are going to vote for the Democratic candidate regardless. The Republican side is closer to 95%. And people say, well, Mark, that's 15%. Is that a pretty big gap? That is a monumental gap, politically speaking. Then the question is, where will the independents come down? The more information coming out there on this story, which happens to be, here we are again, another election coming up. It's amazing how the media repeats itself. They suppressed the story ahead of the 2020 presidential election. Now we have the movie out, and they're going after it like bang, bang, bang. There's no credibility to this. It's bad. Right-wing conservatives. These people are horrible. You get the drill. And here we are 50 days outside of a midterm election. It's astounding.
And they're dredging up every single hate speech they can. Like, this is white supremacy. This is conspiracy theory. This is, it's just one after the other. It's ridiculous. It's hilarious.
Everything. Oh my goodness. All right. So let me ask you this, Brian. What happens now with the saga? You know, you got the movie out there. What happens next?
Well, they're going to be promoting it for a while, of course. And as a writer, I don't necessarily, I don't make the movies, right? So I write them, but I'm in connection with the producers, and they're already talking about, what movie they want to do next. I joked around and said we should have put on at the end of the movie, just a joke, but prepare for the sequel, My Daughter Ashley, because Ashley Biden's diary, right? I mean, now we know that's real, right? And so, but of course, no, we're not going to do that. But and it's not like, it's not like they just want to do political things, just strongly political things. They're interested in many other subjects, So I don't know what we're going to do next. But I'm working on other projects.
With the success you've had with this, I would think, and your background as a conservative, getting away from the woke Hollywood spectacle, if you will.
Yeah.
Your talents could be in quite demand now, because you've got a nice little piece here, particularly among a conservative to we'll call it moderate audience.
Well, yeah, and that's the new talk is what we call parallel economies, meaning because the institutions like Hollywood and such are captured by the far left-wing extremists, everything's so polarized. Conservatives used to be able to work within the system, and we fly in under the radar, or, we infuse our viewpoints into the material, but we make it more subtle. But now, because it's so polarized, they're just trying to cut us off of everything, banks and everything, right? So we have to pursue the parallel economy. So you've got places like the Daily Wire now are making their own movies and having their own subscription for Daily Wire to watch movies. And now Breitbart. And I know there are many people who've been trying to do that. The problem is it requires a lot of money. People don't realize distribution is the key to the success of any art or whatever, and any business, right? But the problem is in order to get the infrastructure and all the connections, it requires a lot of money, hundreds of millions, right? Not just a few million.
Right.
And so consequently, that's what has made it so difficult for so long. But now we're sort of doing that out of necessity because they're kicking us out of everything. So
it literally has gotten to a point where you're almost living two parallel economies here in the United States. You have the liberal economy and you have the conservative economy. And I got news for folks, people view and watch our show who know this already. Conservatives are quite comfortable in that aspect, because we know philosophically the conservative agenda is the right agenda for the American people. And as we head into this election, we saw evidence of it yesterday. What are the issues people are concerned about? They're looking out for their family. They want to see if they can get beyond inflation. They want security. They don't want to be victims of crime. They see what's happening at our border, where the drugs, the illegal crossings, and yet on the left, what's most important to them seems to be like abortion, healthcare. And that enthusiasm gap is really going to be critical when it comes down to these midterm elections that we have coming up, Brian.
But I have to, as an artist, I'm in that realm. I have to charge the conservatives that you got to put your money where your mouth is, and you've got to look, you guys. The left is willing to suffer, and because to them it's all about power, and they're willing to cut off people and cut off, like they'll cut off whole states because of their pro-life legislation, right? But they don't care that that's going to affect them, because they, you know what I mean? And so conservatives have to be that way. So we have to do things that might hurt if we want to support that which is good. So for instance, maybe more conservatives have to consider canceling their subscriptions to Disney and Netflix. And look, these they're not completely evil, but places, things like Disney are becoming so aggressively woke and anti-family that, I realize there is some good stuff in there for your kids, but you see, the more that you spend money to Disney, the more Disney will continue to promote and propagate to your children. So you need to pull back from that stuff, find other avenues like the Daily Wire. Daily Wire is starting another a whole children's programming for them because they realize the value of that. And we need to pull our money from companies that are becoming woke, like they are doing to us, or we won't, or they'll just continue to thrive and we won't.
Brian, I could not agree more with what you just said. And I got to tell you something. I sense that this is happening. We have a lot of guests on. Andrew Krapushides runs a company called Red Balloon. It's an employee-based company. This business is super hot right now because people who are moving out of blue states into red states, a la Texas, a la Florida, a la Idaho, and they're saying, God, get me away from this insanity that's the left. Get me to a conservative employer. I'll bust my ass. I'll do what I can do. But, let me do my job and go home and take care of my family. And don't give me that woke crap all the time. I've had enough.
Yeah.
Wow, this is terrific stuff. Well, we got about a minute left. Give me your closing thoughts about where we as a country go from here, given everything you've been able to see from writing the background to this, to seeing it produced, and the reaction to it.
Well, that's a tall order because, as an artist, my vision in life is to simply to learn about the world so that I can discern what's true and false and communicate truth through storytelling to the world. I do it through novels and through my movies and such. So I'm going to continue to do that, regardless of how successful it is. And even if they shut me down and cancel me, I'll try to find new ways, just like they've been canceling many conservatives. Yep. So, I guess to me the key is just that, it's when you're just like a normal person and you're not in the spotlight. Normal is good, by the way. I'm not saying, but when you're not a person who's got a public person like yourself or me or something like that, you've got your day job and you've got your church or whatever and your family and, you watch your TV occasionally, blah, blah, blah. You live your life. That's good. And that's a high good, but we have to step up and be willing to sacrifice some time and for the cause. You know what I'm saying? Like, even if it's just getting involved in being a poll watcher you know what I mean? We need to do more than just sitting back and complaining about things. We need to get involved. Now, you and I were doing involved by speaking the truth to power out there and, through movies and podcasts, whatever. But if you're not doing something like that, and you're just sitting back and you say, "Oh, isn't that terrible that whatever the latest conservative just got canceled, on YouTube?" Well, do something. Fight. We all need to become fighters, and we don't all have to be in the limelight, but we can fight by supporting those who are doing the fighting, and that's not just supporting the arts, but it's, like I say, getting involved politically on your local level, even just because I know so many conservatives, where we do the bare minimum. And if we want to win back the country, we've got to fight. Now, I think a good example of that has been these in various places in Texas. In fact, I think all over the country, but I know in Texas where the complete child abuse and sexualization that's occurring in schools, the parents are finally starting to stand up and fight and get elected to the school boards and take over the school boards.
That's big deal.
That's the kind of things we got to keep doing more of, or we're not going to win. You've got to fight. Become a fighter.
Yeah, and Brian, I want to echo something you just said there. Democrats view elections They have a long-term goal about what they want this country to be. To them, losing an election is like driving over a speed bump. There'll be casualties. They recognize it, but they're always focused on their goal. And I think what happened is after the 2020 election and all the wokeness and the school board and the way our education system was, I think it all came to a head. And when Glenn Youngkin was elected governor in Virginia, an awakening took place among the American public. They said, enough of this already. And they, if they weren't engaged before, they are engaged now. And I think it's going to lead that way up through the election. Final 30 seconds. If someone wants to reach out to you, who's seen our show, listen to our podcast, how do they get a hold of you?
Through my website, godawa.com, GODAWA.com. And there's a way to email me through that. And if you're interested in any of the books I've written, everything's exclusively on Amazon.com. I'm the only Godawa on Amazon. So you type in my name, you'll see all the books and all the series and lots of information on them there.
Well, that's terrific. Listen, Ron, I want to thank you for joining me today. This has been a really, really great conversation. I wish you all the best from the great state of Texas. Congratulations. Congratulations on drafting, what I call the blueprints for the movie that you actually created. God bless you, and thank you for everything you've done to help the conservative cause.
Thanks for having me, Mark.
Okay, folks, that's it for today. We will be back tomorrow on Thursday. It's Jeffrey on Thursday time. The schnapps, it's getting a little bit better day by day, and hopefully by the end of the week, this will be gone. I can get back to normal. Thank you for all your thoughts on that. Folks, we'll keep cutting through the propaganda. Again, we want to thank Brian for a terrific show today, and we will see you tomorrow. Have a good evening.